Welcome back, everybody. Today it's time to learn who is the king of the parking lot. All right, so we're actually rolling now. That's great. So today we are still reading King of the Parking Lot. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, with Richard III. So let's see if the scientists can figure out where his body is located. Our learning intention for today is we are learning to analyze text structure. So that's the way the text is organized so that we can understand, like I said, how the authors organize ideas and concepts in a text. So we know we are successful when we can, number one, identify the structure of the text. So how did the author organize the text? And then number two, explain how the structure organizes the author's ideas. Like how does that help them to write? Okay, so here we go. Our foundational skills are the prefixes un and in. And remember that these prefixes mean not. So when I add this prefix to the beginning of a word, it means not. So for example, if I have uninspired, that would mean I'm not inspired. I don't want you to be uninspired today. We need to be inspired to get our work done. So for your foundational skills lesson, which you will be completing on your own, you need to underline the base word and circle the prefix for each word. Then use each of the words in a sentence. So I've given you two words. We have the word inexact and we have the word unfamiliar. So I need you to use the word inexact in a sentence. Okay, so if it's inexact, that means it's dun dun dun. What? Not exact. Okay, so use the word inexact in a sentence and then unfamiliar. So that would mean that you're not familiar. So we need to use the word unfamiliar in a sentence as well. All right, let's jump in to vocabulary. So we have the word depiction, and that was going to be found on page 42. And depiction is a representation in image form, as in like a painting or an illustration. So we have our good friend Bob Ross over here. He always makes great depictions of some landscapes with those happy little trees. So depiction, remember, is like a representation of something, usually like an image or like a picture. And then we have ancestors, also on page 42. So we're hitting a lot of vocab on this one page. But an ancestor is a person from whom one is descended, which basically means the family. So that's why we have Lilo and Stitch here. Remember, Ohana means family. Family means no one gets left behind. So I want you to be thinking about ancestors like those are members of of your family or members of someone else's family, but they may have lived just a long time ago. Okay, so usually your ancestors are not members of your family that you have actually met. So let's go ahead and get to reading. Dun, 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 if bones could speak. From the moment the skeleton was found, it began providing clues about the man it belonged to. First, scientists can tell how old a skeleton is by using a test called carbon dating. The carbon dating revealed that the person must have died between 1455 and 1540. King Richard III died in 1485, a match. Secondly, closer study of the curved spine showed that the man didn't actually have a hunched back. He had suffered from scoliosis, a condition that causes a curved spine. One shoulder might lift higher than the other, making the person appear hunchbacked. Together with reports that King Richard III was a hunchback, this was even more amazing evidence. So think about that hunchback. Like his one shoulder might have been higher than the other, so he would walk around like this. All right, we'll continue. Next was the skull. There was much damage to it. A large hole in the back clearly had clean cuts around the edges, suggesting that the man had been hit in the head with a very sharp object. Ugh, sounds painful. They found 8 blows to the head, including a small rectangular hole cut in the cheek caused by a dagger. Since Richard III died in battle, this would make sense. This also meant something else. Either he lost his helmet in battle, or he rode onto the battlefield wearing his crown instead, making him an easy target. Imagine, you wear your crown right onto the battlefield. Dun, dun, dun. I am the best, I am the leader. And they're like, Gonna get you. All right, let's continue. Another interesting fact was that his arm bones were slightly thinner than average for a man. Because some historical records say the king was an excellent fighter despite his thin frame, this made the case even stronger. The skeleton also helped to put the rumor to rest that one of the king's arms was shorter than the other, a monstrous depiction thanks to Shakespeare's play. So remember, a depiction means like a representation, usually like in a picture, but in Shakespeare's play, they literally had someone acting like they were King Richard III. So imagine if they're acting and they had their shoulder all hunched to one side and their arm looked longer than the other. That wouldn't make King Richard III look like a very appealing man. Probably one of the best pieces of evidence, though, came with the help of genealogists who study families and forensic scientists who use DNA, among other things, match people to their ancestors. DNA is a code of cells which makes up all living things. Richard III's ancestors were traced back over 17 generations to 2 descendants alive today in Canada. Scientists were able to match cell samples taken from the skeleton with cell samples from the 2 family members. The 2 DNA strands matched. That proved it. The skeleton found was that of King Richard III of England. Once the king's identity was confirmed, one last specialist was called in. Caroline Wilkinson, an expert in facial reconstruction, uses computers to recreate what a dead person might have looked like when they were alive. After measuring the size and shape of the skull, eye sockets, jawline, and cheekbones, Caroline was able to get a good idea of King Richard III's appearance. Using this information, she was able to use computer technology to reconstruct his face. Everyone was astonished to find that he looked very similar to the paintings created of him, with one exception. He would have appeared younger and kinder, not old and mean, as the artist had made him seem. So again, artist had depicted him as looking old and mean. So our stop and think question right now is, what evidence did the researchers use to support that this skeleton belonged to King Richard III? So let's think. They used a lot of evidence, didn't they? Like just on this page, they used the facial reconstruction technology to reconstruct, and they could compare the 2 pictures side by side. This is the reconstruction, the one that the lady used with the technology, and then this one on the left was one that an artist drew or painted who had actually seen King Richard III, and they matched. So those look pretty close. Okay. They also used DNA, it talked about, to match him to some descendants, match this to descendants of him that are living today, and the DNA matched. So that was another piece of evidence that showed that it matched. And then there was the skull. Remember, the skull had all those blows in it, and we know that he had died in battle. So we know that this person had died and he had taken a dagger to the cheek. Ugh. But that matches the way that he died. So those are just some of the ways that we know, using the text evidence, that the skeleton actually belonged to Richard III. Soon afterwards, Philippa and her team ordered a model of the king's head to be made for everyone to see. This will be on display at the Yorkshire Museum in England. There, visitors can gaze up at his face and wonder if the king was as youthful and handsome as his skull seemed to suggest, or if he indeed appeared to be as deformed. Or if he indeed appeared as a deformed tyrant. Once all the tests are over, the king's remains will be buried in a new location where he can be properly remembered. Philippa Langley could not be more pleased. She began her search with nothing but a dream and a slim chance of succeeding. But not only did she succeed in finding the monarch's lost remains, she was also able to show how Richard III may not have been the horrible monster his successors made him out to be. Does this prove that the 500-year-old king was not an evil tyrant? Not really. The truth is, we will never know. But thanks to archaeologists, scientists, and historical reports, we now have a clearer understanding of who King Richard III really was. So, the next time you are walking through a parking lot, stop, look down, and close your eyes. You never know what mystery may lay beneath your feet, waiting to be discovered. Is everyone looking underneath their feet right now? What could be under there? Guess we'll have to wait and find out. So back to text structure. So remember we said that that is how the author organizes the text or the story. So exactly what I just said. I'm so smart. I'm so good. It's like I made this lesson, guys. So it's the way that the author organizes the story. And one way to organize a text is sequence, which is also called chronological order. So that means that it goes in time order, one thing after another. And that is the way that this text has been organized. So they told us about Philippa Langley's journey of finding Richard III all the way from the beginning to the end in time order. So we've got our little clock there, time order. Time keeps ticking. Time is ticking. Tick, tick, tick. So we are going to use a graphic organizer to go over the main events of how they determined that the skeleton actually belonged to King Richard III. So when we are using a sequence text structure, we can use words like first, next, then, and last. Okay, those are words that help put things in order. And we might see some of these words in the text as well. Now, there are lots of other sequencing words that we could use, like first and then second, or you could say after. Okay, but for our graphic organizer, we're going to use the words first, next, then, and last. So let's think about what was the first thing they did to determine that the skeleton actually belonged to King Richard III. So let's look back at the text. From the moment the skeleton was found, it began providing clues about the man it belonged to. First, oh look, there's that sequence word right there. First. First, scientists can tell how old a skeleton is by using a test called carbon dating. Carbon dating revealed that the person must have died between 1455 and 1540. King Richard III died in 1485. A match. So right there, it told us first they used carbon dating to figure out how old the skeleton was, and it matches. So let's pause there, and we're going to add that to our graphic organizer. So you can see I've added scientists use carbon dating to determine the age, which matches when King Richard III died. Okay, so that was the first thing. And I'm taking really a lot of this right from the text. Okay, so it says they used the carbon dating reveals that a person died between 1455 and 1540. King Richard III died in 1485, a match. So we can say first they used carbon dating to tell how old or the age of the skeleton, which matches when King Richard III died. Let's find the next thing that happens. Ooh, secondly. So that's not the same sequence word, but it is still another sequence word that's telling us what's happening next. Okay, so I said that these words wouldn't necessarily match our graphic organizer, but we are going to find sequence words in the text. So right here, I see the word secondly. That's telling me what happened second. Secondly, a closer study of the curved spine showed that the man didn't actually have a hunched back. He had suffered from scoliosis, a condition that causes a curved spine. One shoulder might lift higher than the other, making the person appear hunchbacked. Together with reports that Richard III was a hunchback, this was more amazing evidence. So, in my graphic organizer, I can add that scientists studied the spine to see that it shows scoliosis, a deformity that the king could have had, because we knew that the king could have been hunchbacked, okay? But we also know that this skeleton is showing that there's scoliosis, which matches kind of like being hunchbacked, because back 500 years ago when King Richard III was living, they probably didn't have the word for the disease scoliosis. Okay, so that was the next thing that happened. So we're going to continue reading and see what's happening after that. Next was the skull. Ooh, next. Remember, we just had that word. Next is in our graphic organizer. Are we going to put it in the spot for next? No, we'll put it in then, but remember, we said that our words aren't always going to match. Next was the skull. So I know my clue for the next box is going to be about the skull. There was much damage to it. A large hole in the back had clean cuts around the edges, suggesting the man had been hit with a very sharp object. They found 8 blows to the head, including a small rectangular hole in the cheek caused by a dagger. Since Richard III died in battle, this would make sense. This also meant something else. Either he lost his helmet in battle, or he rode onto the battlefield wearing his crown instead, making him an easy target. Okay, so right there, it's giving us details about what happened next. So we know it had to do with his skull. They checked the skull, and they're finding reasons why that would be King Richard III. And then another interesting fact was that his arm bones were slightly thinner than average for a man. Because some historical records say that the king was an excellent fighter despite his thin frame, this made the case even stronger. So after that, we could say, well, they looked at his arms and they noticed that the arms matched the descriptions. The skeleton also helped to put the rumor to rest that one of the king's arms was shorter than the other, a monstrous depiction thanks to Shakespeare's play. And then probably the best piece of evidence, though, came with the help of genealogists who study families and forensic scientists who use DNA, among other things, to match people to their ancestors. DNA is a code of cells, which make up all living things. Richard III's ancestors were traced back over 17 generations to the 2 descendants alive today in Canada, and they had found out that it matches. So, for your reading response, your job is to fill in these last 2 boxes. Okay, what are the last 2 things or 2 more things that the scientists did to prove that this skeleton belongs to King Richard III? So make sure that you are using evidence from the text, and it will be included on the seesaw activity so that way you can look back. Use that evidence to fill in these last 2 boxes. So what did they do after they had the carbon dating and after they studied the spine? Okay, there were 2 big things that they still did. There's actually 3, but you can pick 2. 2 more things that they did to match the skeleton and prove that it's King Richard III. All right, have a wonderful day. Keep working hard, get all your work done, and I will see you all next time. Bye.